Well, I would say good afternoon. It is good afternoon, but I was going to say good day. But I think I did that once in maybe our last book. And that's just weird. Hey, hello. It's Adam and Lindsay, and it's Theology Thursday. And we've begun the new book. Tell us about the book, Lindsay.
Well, this is on the Incarnation by Saint Athanasius. I told you I would pick one this time that was like much more readily available because our last one was only available like paperback from a weird publisher.
From one publisher.
Yeah. And so this one is like everywhere.
It's everywhere. In all sorts of bindings.
Free. There's free copies
digital,
on the internet.
There were like 7 or 8 links I feel like we shared.
Yeah. It was a lot. So this is the one we have. Ours has the introduction by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. Very famous edition of it.
Yeah.
And he was contemporary of the translator.
Yeah. And so we had done 2 relatively modern books, and so I was like, hey, we should pick something older.
And we had a whole list of more modern books that we could do, but
And then hilariously, the introduction by C.S. Lewis on this one is why you should read old books.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that a little bit later, but...
And good, I think that was good wisdom on your part, because she's the one that said, hey, I feel like we need, because I had like maybe 1 or 2 modern ones. So I was like, hey, let's do this one next.
His list was exhaustive because he's like, I want to read this one. I want to read this one.
Well, these push me to read books that otherwise just sit on my stack of books to read. But she said, I want to read an old book. I was like C.S. Lewis old? And she's like, I'm thinking that, but maybe even really older than that. And so we pulled Athanasius off the old bookshelf, and she looked over it and said, let's do that one. Yeah, so on that note, we did share all the links, but we shared them in the comments.
Yes.
But we also shared them in an email to our church folks. Yeah. If you're on our church email, you're not necessarily on the Theology Thursday email. So if you're wanting to be on the Theology Thursday email so that every Thursday you get these videos in your inbox along with some links of other stuff and some encouragement, that sort of stuff, you got to let us know. We don't want to junk up your email inbox. Yeah. We don't want to spam you with stuff you didn't sign up for.
I don't want to.
So let us know, hey, I want on that email if you want to be on that email. And also leave us feedback, comments, and whatnot. But that's,
comments, or, you can message us if you don't want your comments to be public. Sure. That's cool too. But, just something to let us know we're not, like, talking to no one.
But also to... encourage some conversation. Yeah. It's always good when you've got somebody to talk with while you're reading stuff, and especially if it's new stuff to you.
Yeah. So this is week 1, and we're going to cover the introductions in chapter 1. And then next week is week 2, and we'll actually cover chapter 2 and 3.
Okay.
Because 2 and 3 are like a continuation of one
another.
another.
Yeah, it's like a part.
Yeah, it's like a part 1, part 2. And so we're just going to do them together.
Yeah.
Just do all of it together. Because if you read the preface, you know that the chapter sections are not original.
Yeah, because he essentially is writing a treatise.
Yeah.
Almost in the form of a letter. He's explaining something to someone that's probably around his same age and teaching him some of the essentials of the Christian faith.
Well, I don't know that they necessarily in the 4th century made books with chapters.
Yeah.
I think that's a more modern thing. So.
At least, certainly not in the same way.
So this week, preface, forward, chapter 1, and then next week will be chapter 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So, and that's standard across. I did check all the other translations of this, and that's pretty standard that the chapters are in there.
Yeah.
So, anyway, all right. So before we start, Adam's going to read John 1 through 4.
All right. John 1 through 4 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men.
And though he doesn't mention necessarily those verses, I feel like those verses kind of sum up where he starts with chapter 1.
Yeah.
I feel like that was kind of like the heart of chapter 1. So y'all may not have it if you don't have the introduction by C.S. Lewis bit that we have. But I know I did leave links to this paper copy, and then also there's a digital copy that has it too.
Okay.
But So we're
And it's probably accessible online. If you look up C.S. Lewis on reading old books, you'll probably find somebody that's blogged about it and they've got a link to it or something.
And we're not gonna go over it too deeply.
Just
but one of the things that I did want to note is Lewis says the student is half afraid to meet one of the great philosophers face to face. And I do feel like that's very prevalent when we start talking about reading theology books. That a lot of us are like, I can't read Athanasius. But Lewis actually argues that, he doesn't argue this, but anybody can write a book today.
He does. Yeah.
Anybody can write a book today. It's especially today.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know what is good and what isn't good. And so Lewis argues that if you're not especially great at theology or philosophy, you should start with reading the old stuff, because those are the time-tested true things, and that it's not you're not having to use as much critical thinking and not skepticism, but reading critically.
Critical reading skills.
Critical reading.
Wisdom.
I see this all the time on social media, in social media groups that are for apologetics or for this or that. They'll say is X author reliable or not, and then everybody of course is weighing in based on their background and their journey and their theological leanings and stuff. And it's okay, but old books, we're not having to say is Athanasius reliable or not.
I mean, if you're a Christian, this is it's the fountainhead of what we believe about Jesus.
Yeah.
If you hold to Orthodox Christian faith about Jesus.
If you were reading about philosophy, you wouldn't have to say is Plato a legit philosopher or not?
Yeah.
It's freaking Plato.
Yeah. Even if there's a point that he makes that you disagree with.
Yeah.
It's fine. And yes.
And so I feel like the introduction by C.S. Lewis was kind of a, hey, let's not be timid. Let's just tackle this.
Yeah. And he does make the really funny point that if you just pick up the example he uses Plato, you're probably going to get more out of it than if you just read a textbook about Plato, because it's going to be filled with all the isms and all these intricate explanations and whatnot, and you're going to be lost typically. And and one of the things I love about this book is it is so theologically accessible. He's not using highly technical words. You may have to look up a few words just because they're archaic, but they're not highly technical terms.
So what I do when I read, if I have to look up a word, I always highlight it, and there's a specific color that I highlight the words that I've looked up.
I noticed the color, but then I was confused by some of the other colors. She's got a whole color coding system.
Some of the words are haphazard. It's just to not have the same color side by side.
Yeah.
Sometimes I read with a color coding system, but this book does not lend itself to that. So I highlight things in pink that I words that I don't know, and then I look them up and I write down the definition so that
I'm able to read her definition.
So that if I come across it again or if I'm rereading it, I don't have to remember that definition. I can just look at it, because I had no idea what traduce meant.
Yeah.
It happens. So, starting with kind of the introduction preface, it kind of just told us who Athanasius is. And so I figured we'd kind of go over that a little bit.
The story of his life.
Yeah. And I thought that I liked Lewis's, what he said about Athanasius. He said, we're proud that our own country has more than once stood against the world. Of course, he's British, and he was, fought in World War I and helped with the war efforts in World War II. And so, so we're proud that our own country has stood more than once against the world, and Athanasius did the same. He stood for the Trinitarian doctrine, whole and undefiled, when it looked as if all the civilized world was slipping back from Christianity into the religion of Arius, into one of those sensible synthetic religions which are so strongly recommended today, and which then, as now, included among their devotees many highly cultivated clergymen. And so I think that's a good introduction as who is Athanasius, and he's the guy who stood for truth when nobody else was.
Yeah.
So he was in the 4th century, which means he was in the 300s.
Yes.
4th century means 300s. That always
in the early 300s.
Yeah, that always.
He lived throughout most of them, but yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those things with kids. That's what always confuses them. How are we living in the 21st century if it's not 2100 yet?
Because we're building to 2100.
So he was a contemporary of the Desert Fathers. I particularly love Antony,
Mhm.
but it was Antony Gregory of Nazianzus.
Nazianzen?
Yeah.
Or of
And
Nazianzus.
then Basil.
Yeah.
Those are the Desert Fathers, right?
No. Anthony is the most famous Desert Father.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of
there
other
are some really cool,
ones.
if you're into art, the Temptation of Saint Anthony
Yes.
is a really cool painting. It's creepy. But
So Gregory, and then Gregory of Nyssa,
yeah.
and Basil the Great,
Yes.
those three are what are called the Cappadocian Fathers. They're up in Cappadocia, which is
not quite
very mountainous and up north of Israel. And they're but in some ways they're kind of replicating in their own context what was going on with the Desert Fathers, vows of poverty and whatnot.
This is like
extreme
the
generosity.
monastic origins, and it was brought on by exile and necessity. That their monastic ways, and they just kind of kept them because they just worked so well for them. But so Athanasius was an Egyptian by birth, but he was educated Greek.
Yes.
So he thought Greek, even though he's Egyptian by birth.
Born and lived in Alexandria almost his entire life, other than his 5 exiles.
Yeah. And he also saw a lot of persecution of the church in his childhood. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that it was interesting.
In very young childhood.
Yeah, they pointed out that in his most impressionable years, he didn't just learn the Christian faith, he saw it play. Like, he saw the Christian faith living itself out. Living
itself out in great difficulty.
Conflict, yeah. And he died in 373.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a long time ago. All right, so chapter 1, Adam.
Yeah. So he starts with the beginning, which is always a good place to start.
Start in the beginning and then you go to the end.
Move your way forward till you get to the end and then stop. So he starts at the beginning. He starts with the creation and the fall. He deals with the two together because that's essentially what you have in the book of Genesis. You've got just 2 chapters about creation, and then immediately the fall is presented. And so he's going to connect what happens in salvation to what has happened in creation, because it's the same one who saves us that creates us. Yes. Or put another way, the one who creates us is the one who saves us.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever thought of salvation that way, that salvation is an act of creation. Like, it's just furthering creation.
Yeah.
Or I guess rescuing creation. And I know that, like, I know Paul says it.
New creation, yeah.
I know
the biblical language.
But my brain
creative,
never said, like, salvation is creation.
Yeah. That's why N.T. Wright's one of the most famous ones that makes this point, that the resurrection happened on a Sunday, not the first day of the week, which is often how we think of it. Of course, it's the first day of the week because the weeks are cyclical in a sense, but on the 8th day, because it's the day
on Monday, but the strong start on Sunday.
Oh gosh, but so it's the first day of a new week. It's the first day of creation, or of new creation. Yeah.
All right, so go ahead.
I was going to point out, even a lot of the biblical language that we use about salvation. Well, let's put it this way. Think about the prefixes of the words: redemption, reconciliation, and whatnot. They are about restoring something, restoring or redeeming, restoration. That's another one. They are calling back to something that was prior. And of course, moving forward, moving beyond it.
In my head, I think if you paint a painting, you created something. If you restore a painting, you didn't create.
I mean, in a sense.
And I know you're
if there was greatly damaged,
what was lost, but I don't know.
Well, it definitely is a different kind of creation.
Hemming pants is not making pants; it's fixing pants.
No, but
making pants is making pants.
But it does take an artist, or someone with those sort of creative skills to be able to do that work.
I mean, it's the same thing.
It's
feels different to me.
But I think that's fascinating, because what it tells us that God doesn't do is just kind of throw creation on the scrap heap.
Yeah.
Instead, he's like, oh no, we're remaking this.
Yeah.
We made it. We can restore it. We can redeem it and reconcile with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and so then he starts talking about creation from nothing, which we then meet again the Epicureans, which I think Wright talked about in our last Theology Thursday. Yep. So I was like, hey, we're talking about Epicureans again. We're back.
Yeah.
We're back, only this time it's Athanasius talking about them. So they denied that there was any mind behind the universe at all. Which his point then is, if everything is automatic and unintentional, like there's no intention behind it, it just happens because the system makes it happen, then there's zero reason for any of the diversity that we see in creation. Like, not just diversity among things, but even diversity among, like, the same thing.
If it's just a machine, it's just producing what the machine produces, what it's programmed to produce.
Right.
But the fact that, I mean, you think about like in a Ford plant or something where they're building Ford trucks or whatever, it's not a single machine that's building all of the parts and assembling them together and all that. Each machine has its own thing that it can produce.
But even the Ford plant is only producing Fords.
Yeah, it's not.
It cannot produce the diversity of vehicles on the planet.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, most like plants like that can't even produce much more than a single type of that one brand of vehicle.
This is true, because I remember there was like the Nissan plant in Mississippi that only made the NVs and
maybe Titans. I think because they're similar.
I think they're
but they weren't making these Altimas and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And so if there is no mind or intention behind the creator, then there's no reason for any diversity. It should all be the sameness.
You mean behind the creation?
Yeah, behind creation, everything should be sameness. Like, if it's just a random, these things mixed together and make this, it should always make this.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it to ever make that.
Creativity takes a creator.
Yeah. Yes. So then he talks about Plato, that he believed that God created, but out of matter that already existed.
Kind of unformed matter.
And that limits...
He's got stuff to work with.
Yeah, it limits God to only what is available. And Athanasius says that moves God from a creator to just a craftsman.
He's a pretty good assemblyman.
He can only make from what he's got. And that's where we find ourselves. We can only make... Like, we're creative because we bear the image of God, but we can only make out of what we've got. Yeah. We're very limited creators. So he's saying, like, hey, if you are going the way of Plato, you're saying that God is a very limited creator. And, we would say, no, he's not. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about Plato?
So, on that note, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing.
Yeah.
I was actually listening to a very short William Lane Craig podcast on the way home earlier, and there was a question written in about that, and it was about whether or not when God creates out of nothing, are we talking about like nothing physical, nothing material, that sort of thing, or are we talking about absolute nothingness? Because oftentimes, that's what we think. We think, oh, the biblical doctrine of creation out of nothing is absolute nothingness, which would be a logical impossibility, because if there is a God, no, he's not physical, no, he's not material, but he is something. A thing. He is something, and the Christian faith teaches us he is three persons in that one thing. But just to be clear on that, creation out of nothing is not like there's absolute nothingness and then suddenly there's something. The Christian doctrine of creation is that there is the mind, God, who brings creation out of nothing. Yeah.
I always like the image in is it the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe?
Where Aslan is singing?
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, there's the voice.
Magician's nephew.
It's the Magician's nephew.
Yeah, the Magician's nephew with the creation of Narnia, and he's singing and things are just popping up.
Yeah. There's faint light and then things are appearing in trees.
Things just start coming up.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So then he starts talking about Gnostics, which, hello again. because
N.T. Wright.
N.T.
Also,
Wright,
yep.
our last Theology Thursday book, he talked a lot about Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
So we're back at that apparently.
Some things never go away.
And so the Gnostics would have said that God is not the deviser of the universe, that somebody else did that bit. There's something else beyond, or besides him.
Yeah.
Which is that mysterious mystery, you know?
Yeah. And Gnosticism is essentially dualistic.
Yeah.
And so you got the good God, but it was another darker evil God that created matter because matter's evil. And
in that dualism, there's a God and a good and evil that are equitable.
Yeah, equitable, ultimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do not believe that Satan is equitable to God in any way.
He's an already defeated foe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not even equitable to man, really.
No.
Anyway, that's like a sidetrack. Don't want to get into cosmology at the moment. So then he goes into talking about that we were made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that image, that we're made able to reflect God and the mind of God.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a little difficult to wrap your head around. And he's saying mind of God, is it similar to like what Kinlaw talks about when he's talking about the mind of Christ?
Yes.
Or is he just talking about like infiniteness?
No, well,
eternality.
No, I don't think.
Soul substance. Is he actually talking about the mind of Christ?
I think by mind he's talking about will, desire. Obviously, rationality is part of that, and reason, logic, all that's part of it because all that finds its being in him. I think I don't think he's talking about that. I mean, in some small way, we can reflect his infinitude, but obviously only in a finite way.
Yeah.
So mind there, I think he's wisdom, character, his will, all that sort of stuff.
Okay. And so he creates man. He talks about it with a law and a place.
Mm-hmm. Which is a fascinating point.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
That he creates them set in Eden, but with parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And
he gives them a home.
Yeah. And then
a way of being in that home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then man violates the parameters and is removed from their place. So you lose both of the place and the law, essentially.
Yeah.
And then they move toward deeper and deeper corruption.
Which you find, you may think like, wait a minute, do we read about this?
But that's
Eden?
about it. But that's what he gives back to Israel, is he gives back to Israel a law and a place.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's funny that you make that point.
In the New Testament, he gives us now a law and a place. Like now we're talking about the kingdom of God and the law written on our hearts.
Yes.
And so he gives us back again a law and a place.
A law and a place. In the church, he calls us to a place. He calls us together, ecclesia, the called out ones. And then he also gives us a law, a new law written in our hearts by his Spirit who inhabits our hearts and the gathering, the place. Where we are the temple, gathered together,
the kingdom of
and
God
scattered
on earth.
Yes, and but that's fascinating that you make that point. I think it's an astute observation that's precisely what he's offering to Israel.
Yeah,
I mean, he offers them more, but he's offering them what is lost because he's trying to reclaim that which is lost. Yeah, but you do that spiraling. You do see that playing out. In the first chapters of Genesis, you know, you've got the fall in 3, and then immediately after you got Cain and Abel and Seth, and then all that's transpiring after that, and then you've got this build up to the point where God says, "I regret that I've even made this place," and He washes it clean with flood. But then even beyond that, you've got the Tower of Babel and all that's being all this spiraling is playing out until you get to the promise of Abraham, or Abram to be more particular, in 12, where he says, if you will obey me, trust me, I'm going to give you a place. I'm going to give you a place, and I always say a farm, a family, and fame, which is really funny. There's the things that Yahweh appeals to with Abram.
It's the things that appeal to most people.
Well, it's what the vast majority of us want. We just want a place where we belong.
Yeah, we just want our own
We
spot.
want
And
to
we
know
want
that when we
our own
lay our
place.
head down for the last time, that there's something meaningful that we've contributed to the world that goes on beyond us. And we want to also be remembered in a way. We want our people to cherish us in their hearts. And
All right, so then he goes into the next section is the Word made flesh. And on it's page 29 on ours.
Okay.
But he says, it was our sorry case that caused the Word to come down, our transgression that called out his love for us, so that he made haste to help us and appear among us.
Yeah.
And it's that, oh, happy fall.
Felix culpa. Yeah.
So he then talks about the man as an embodied spirit. He specifically calls it that.
Yeah.
Right over yonder.
Still page 29.
Yeah.
And that's essential to our humanity.
Yes.
Embodied spirits.
Yes, that is how we were created. That is like who we are. We're spirit.
That is what
he
called good. That is what he made.
That's what he called very good.
Yes. And that's what he called that is part of what it means for us creatures, human creatures, to be made even in his image. Which is fascinating that the image.
And that's what he talks about. They were made from nothing. And so we have that in common with like the rest of creation. But we have his spirit in us, which makes us like him.
Yes. And
so we're of both.
His word, the Son, the eternal Son,
well,
who Paul calls the image of the invisible God, he will also become an embodied spirit.
So man's turning away from God brought them under the law of death. And death was in the process of having complete dominion over man. And he says on page 30, so were they now on the way to returning through corruption to their non-existence again? Basically, they're like, it sounds like he is saying that man in the fall is almost losing his soul.
He's losing his being.
Yeah. And just becoming one of the animals, because he's going to become like, nothingness. That is really loud. I don't know if anybody can hear that. It's not in our house. But he says, by nature, of course, man is mortal, since he's made from nothing, which is what we're talking about. But he also bears the likeness of him who is. I like that he calls God that, him who is. And if he preserves that likeness through constant contemplation, then his nature is deprived of its power, and he can remain incorrupt. So, it's an odd way of wording it.
It is.
But I liked it.
Sometimes it's the odd way of wording things that make you stop and think about your assumptions and the implications.
And that's what we're talking about, being saved from, saved from returning to the non-existence.
Yeah. From being wholly
corruption.
and completely undone.
Yeah. The corruption that makes you just dirt.
Yeah.
And so then he ends by talking about the plight of man on this chapter of creation and the fall. That God has graciously made us out of nothing, but also graciously bestowed his life by the grace of the Word. And he always capitalizes Word, because we read in John, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, which is why I said, and he doesn't directly talk about John chapter 1, like that's clearly like what's going on in his head.
Oh yeah.
The whole time he's writing this is John chapter 1 is happening in his head. So that the fall was basically us turning away from that grace and just embracing nothing. So on page 30 he says, the presence of the Word with them shielded them even from natural corruption, which I find fascinating. Because natural corruption just being like death, decay. Yeah. Just the natural undoing of things. Like when a tree dies, it decays, becomes part of the ground, and turns back into nothing. Yeah. And then it's
absorbed into other
its pieces
things,
are then made into something.
Yeah. But that tree is no longer
that tree is
constituted. Gone. It's distributed or whatever.
And so without that image of God, without the grace of creation and of the Word in us, then we become the nothing too. Yeah. So, even though I want to be buried where I can be absorbed, reabsorbed into the ground. And so Adam knows.
Y'all are gonna have to hold me accountable on this.
Adam knows this.
As long as you're buried, I'm cool with that.
Embalming is so weird. Like sealing it all in. Like I want to
pickling it.
I want to become dust.
Pickling it for the resurrection.
Yeah, I don't want to be. I don't want to be preserved for the resurrection. I want to become dust and remade. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
All right. So on page 31, is that where he kind of ends? Yeah.
Yeah.
He kind of ends by saying, "Indeed, they had in their sinning surpassed all limits, for having invented wickedness in the beginning, and so involved themselves in death and corruption. They had gone on gradually from bad to worse, not stopping at any one kind of evil, but continually, as with an insatiable appetite, devising new kinds of sins."
Which is what Genesis 6 says. Some of the darkest, saddest verses in Scripture.
And that's kind of where we find ourselves at the end of creation, the fall, is we have an insatiable appetite for evil.
Yeah.
As Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, and then N.T. Wright ripped off.
N.T. Wright.
The line between good and evil runs not through nations
ripped
and countries.
Off. You just said he ripped it off.
But through the heart of every man.
That's hilarious.
He did rip it off. And he didn't give credit. I only say ripped it off because he didn't give credit.
Yes. We were talking about that late the other night. May I read that passage from Genesis 6 that I keep referencing?
Yeah, you're the boss.
Because I'm not the boss. So it's in chapter 6 of Genesis, verses 5. 5 and 6. We'll stop there. The Lord Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention, think of this phrase, every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart.
Yeah. And that's where we find ourselves going into the next chapters of the divine dilemma. Like, that's the dilemma.
Yeah.
Like,
what do we do about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man has chosen to unexist himself. Like, and so that's the dilemma. Is God gonna let us?
Do we just let him walk away, or?
Yeah. Is God gonna let us, or is he gonna say, no, I made you for better than that?
Yeah.
So, anyway, next week, chapters 2 and 3.
Yes.
Together. Yeah.
And it's not long.
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, the whole book's not long.
No.
The whole book's like,
90
pages? So it can't be that long.
If you skip the intro and all that stuff, then it's even less. But
yeah. It's like 17 pages in my copy.
Yeah.
So
okay. So chapters 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And if you need to do a little catch up, and meet us back here next Thursday.
Yep, Thursday.
And don't forget, let us know. Hey, put me on that email list. I want to make sure I don't miss them, and we'll add you to the we'll subscribe you to the email list. And
we will not. He will.
I will. And comment. Share some comments on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're catching this, and we'd love to chat about this stuff. You want me to get the thing? Or you got the thing? You got the thing? All right, folks. It's been fun. I hope you've enjoyed this, and catch us next week.